welcome to Haunted Midnight. I upload true stories every week on my channel, so if you enjoy this video, check out my other videos. Before we begin, over 90% of you are not subscribed. It would be amazing if you guys can subscribe and support me, as I am still a small channel. Thank you for watching. I never imagined that a simple swipe on Hinge could lead to something so unsettling, but here I am, sharing a story that still sends chills down my spine every time I think about it. It all began on an ordinary day when I was casually browsing Hinge, not expecting anything out of the blue. Then I came across Alex, whose profile was flawless, a smiling face, witty captions, and interests that perfectly matched mine. Everything about Alex felt too perfect, almost as if every detail had been meticulously curated. I swiped right, and after a few days of exchanging messages, we arranged our first date. I was both excited and a little cautious, but nothing in my gut warned me of the storm that was about to brew. The first date was nothing short of delightful. We met at a local coffee shop, where the conversation flowed effortlessly. Alex was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in every word I said. I left the date feeling as if I'd finally met someone who understood me. But as the days passed and our connection deepened, I began to notice small, inexplicable details that didn't quite add up. It started with minor coincidences: a shadow of a figure in the background at work, a familiar silhouette in a crowd during my evening walks. I brushed it off as my imagination running wild, a byproduct of the excitement and nerves that often come with new love. A few weeks into our relationship, I started receiving strange glances at my workplace. I work in a relatively secure office building, and I prided myself on maintaining a professional and private life. One afternoon, while waiting for a meeting to start, I caught sight of someone I thought I recognized lingering near the entrance. It wasn't until later, when a colleague mentioned having seen a person with a similar appearance, that I began to question if this was mere coincidence or something more sinister. The nagging feeling that someone was watching me slowly crept in, and I couldn't shake the sensation even during the busiest of days. I decided to confront my feelings of unease by analyzing every encounter with Alex. I went back over our conversations, replaying every detail in my mind. There was something off about the ease with which Alex had seemed to integrate into my life. It was as if Alex had been waiting for the perfect moment to appear in my world, gradually blurring the lines between our digital interactions and my everyday reality. I started to wonder if I had unknowingly invited someone into my life who was more than they appeared. Despite my growing doubts, I continued to meet Alex, each encounter laced with an undercurrent of anxiety that I couldn't explain. The turning point came one late evening when I was leaving work. I remember the night vividly. It was a typical evening, with the hum of the city in the background and the soft glow of streetlights casting long shadows. As I walked to the parking lot, I noticed a car idling nearby. The headlights were off, and it was parked in a spot where I never expected to see anyone waiting. My heart pounded as I hurried to my car, glancing nervously in the rearview mirror. That night, I couldn't sleep at all, plagued by the thought that someone had been watching me closely. The next morning, the unease clung to me like a shadow that I couldn't shake off. I tried to rationalize the situation. Maybe it was just a coincidence, a random encounter that had nothing to do with Alex. But then, more incidents occurred. I began to see the same car parked outside my apartment building on different nights. A few times I even saw someone in the distance, always in the same spot, always watching before disappearing into the darkness. The feeling of being surveilled became so intense that it started affecting my everyday routine. I took different routes home, constantly looking over my shoulder, and even considered changing my phone number. Each small occurrence slowly chipped away at my sense of security, leaving me feeling vulnerable and exposed. One evening, after another unnerving day, I decided to retrace my steps and look for any evidence that could explain these occurrences. I revisited the coffee shop where we first met and asked around, trying to recall if I had seen Alex there before. The barista mentioned that Alex had indeed visited a couple of times, always at odd hours, and always leaving before I arrived. The comment struck me as peculiar. Why would someone with such a seemingly perfect profile frequent a coffee shop so sporadically and at such late hours? The more I investigated, the more it felt like I was being drawn into a web of inexplicable coincidences and carefully hidden secrets. Despite my growing fear, I couldn't completely cut ties with Alex. I still wanted to believe that there was a genuine connection between us, that the unsettling incidents were nothing more than coincidences amplified by my own paranoia. I decided to ask Alex about some of the strange occurrences in a casual manner, hoping to get some reassurance. Alex laughed it off and said that I was probably just overthinking things, attributing the odd moments to my busy life and restless mind. But deep down, I knew that there was something more at play, something that defied the simple explanation of an overactive imagination. As the weeks turned into months, the situation only escalated. The once charming and attentive Alex started exhibiting behaviors that I could no longer ignore. I noticed changes in the way Alex interacted with me, subtle hints of possessiveness, and an almost obsessive need to be involved in every aspect of my life. I began to realize that every detail, every coincidence, was part of a larger puzzle that was slowly revealing a disturbing truth. The person I had believed to be perfect was, in fact, orchestrating a scenario that invaded my personal space and blurred the boundaries between digital intimacy and real-life surveillance. The final straw came on an ordinary day that began like any other, only to end with an unnerving revelation that shattered the illusion of safety I had clung to. While leaving work, I encountered that same idling car once again. This time, my instinct was not to rush to my car, but to confront the situation head-on. I walked a few steps towards the vehicle, only to catch a glimpse of a familiar face through the tinted windows. It was Alex. In that moment, all the pieces fell into place. The perfect match, the eerie coincidences, the relentless presence at every turn. I felt the wave of terror and betrayal, realizing that the person I had allowed into my life had been watching me all along, orchestrating every encounter to blur the line between admiration and obsession. I don't know how I eventually managed to extricate myself from that situation, but I do know that the experience left an indelible mark on my life. The sense of betrayal, the violation of my privacy, and the overwhelming feeling of being constantly observed are memories that still haunt me. Even now, years later, I sometimes catch a fleeting glimpse of a shadow or a car parked in a seemingly innocuous spot, and I am instantly transported back to that dark period in my life. It was a time when what began as an exciting venture into online dating turned into a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. Looking back, I realized that I ignored several warning signs, dismissing them as coincidences or mere figments of an overactive imagination. I trusted too easily, and in doing so, allowed someone into my life who ultimately proved to be nothing more than a calculated presence, lurking behind the facade of perfection. I don't regret having experienced that chapter of my life, because it taught me the value of vigilance and the importance of trusting my gut. However, the scars remain, a constant reminder that sometimes the things we desire most can become the source of our deepest fears. I still remember the day I matched with Jamie on Hinge like it was yesterday, even though it feels like a lifetime ago now. I had been going through a rough patch, searching for a fresh start and a little excitement in my life, and when I saw Jamie's profile, it felt like a breath of fresh air. Their pictures were warm and inviting, and the bio was filled with quirky anecdotes and a hint of mystery that intrigued me. I thought I had finally found someone genuine, someone with a real story. Little did I know, the truth was far more disturbing than anything I could have imagined. At first, everything with Jamie was smooth sailing. We exchanged messages late into the night, sharing stories about our lives and laughing over the absurdities of the dating world. Jamie was funny and attentive, and every time we met up, I felt a deep connection, like I had known them forever. I dismissed any lingering doubts about the background details on their profile. I mean, who really scrutinizes every little detail on a dating app, right? I assumed that any red flags would have been caught in the endless digital chatter that fills out our profiles. But as the weeks passed, I started to notice subtle inconsistencies in the details Jamie shared. There were times when their stories about past jobs or hometown adventures didn't quite add up. I remember one evening, after a particularly long conversation, I decided to casually bring up their past. Jamie mentioned having a pretty rough childhood and even hinted at some mistakes made along the way. But there was always this air of vagueness around it, like they were carefully avoiding the full picture. I tried not to overthink it, chalking it up to personal privacy or just a way of keeping some parts of their life reserved for themselves. It wasn't until a few months into our relationship that things started to get really weird. I was scrolling through social media one night and saw a photo of Jamie at an event I had never heard of, looking completely different from the person I knew. There was something off about the image, a different style, a different vibe, and my curiosity was instantly piqued. I asked Jamie about it the next time we met, and they laughed it off as a phase, a fun experiment with their look. Still, the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't let go, so I did a bit of casual digging, thinking I'd find nothing more than a silly fashion choice. Instead, I stumbled across a name in an old forum post that Jamie had mentioned in passing during one of our dates. Over the next few days, I pieced together bits of information that painted a chilling picture. I found an article from a local newspaper that mentioned a man with a different name who had recently been released from prison. The article was brief, noting that the individual had served time for a series of violent crimes but had been given a second chance by the justice system. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw the photo. It was unmistakably Jamie. My heart pounded as I started connecting the dots. The warm, charming person I'd grown to care for had fabricated parts of their identity. The inconsistencies in their stories, the vague details about their past. It all suddenly made sense. I confronted a wave of disbelief and fear. I spent sleepless nights mulling over what I had uncovered, trying to piece together the real story behind the person I thought I knew. I remembered the moments when Jamie had inexplicably dodged questions about their past, and I recalled feeling a strange discomfort when Jamie casually mentioned the word redemption without any real context. In hindsight, those moments were like breadcrumbs, leading to a far darker narrative than I ever expected. One evening, after another long day of trying to come to terms with this revelation, I decided to take a closer look at the timeline of Jamie's life as they had described it. I reread every conversation, every shared detail, and the more I looked, the more it became clear that the Jamie I knew online was meticulously constructed. The person who had charmed me with stories of second chances and fresh starts was a master at disguising their true past. I felt betrayed, not just by the lies, but by the fact that I had willingly let someone with such a dangerous history into my life. The feeling of betrayal was compounded by a deep sense of vulnerability. I began to notice that even after our breakup, I couldn't shake off the fear that Jamie was still somehow watching over my life. I'd catch glimpses of a familiar figure in unexpected places, a flash of a face in a passing car, a shadow lurking behind a storefront, even a fleeting reflection in a window that made my heart skip a beat. The paranoia wasn't rational, I knew, but the emotional scars from that revelation ran deep. I tried to tell myself that I had nothing to worry about, that Jamie was just another chapter in a crazy dating story, but the experience left me with a lingering unease. It wasn't just about the lies or the hidden past. It was the realization that someone so troubled could reinvent themselves so convincingly that you wouldn't suspect a thing until it was too late. I had been seduced by the allure of a second chance, a narrative that promised transformation and redemption. Instead, I was left grappling with the fact that some people carry their demons so quietly, they can easily hide behind a mask of charm and charisma. In the days that followed, I found myself unable to trust my own judgment. I questioned every detail about our interactions, wondering if I had been too blinded by the possibility of a perfect connection. The discovery forced me to confront the reality that the digital world can be as treacherous as it is enchanting. I learned that behind every carefully curated profile, there might be secrets that could one day turn your life upside down. I still remember the long, agonizing nights filled with doubt and regret, when I wished I had heeded those small warnings and listened to the whispers of my intuition. As time went on, I managed to rebuild a sense of normalcy, but the memory of Jamie's deception remained a constant reminder of the fragility of trust. I occasionally find myself scanning faces in a crowd, subconsciously looking for signs of hidden truths or secret pasts. The experience left me with a heightened sense of caution that I carry to this day, a stark contrast to the naive optimism I once had. I didn't end up hating online dating altogether, but I did learn that not everything is as it seems, and sometimes the stories people tell are just a veneer over a much darker reality. There's no neat conclusion to this story, no life lesson neatly packaged with a moral. It's just a raw recounting of a time when my trust was shattered by someone I believed had a second chance of life, only to discover that some paths are impossible to outrun. I'm not sharing this to warn anyone away from trying to find love online, but rather to acknowledge that sometimes the allure of transformation can mask some very real dangers. I still wander through my days with a cautious heart, mindful of the fact that people are capable of reinventing themselves in ways that defy simple explanation. Now, whenever I log on to Hinge or any dating app, there's a small part of me that remains vigilant, always aware that behind every profile might lie a story I'm not prepared for. I don't dwell on the past too much, but I do remember Jamie every now and then, a reminder of the time when the person I thought I knew turned out to be a stranger hiding in plain sight. And that realization, unsettling as it is, has permanently changed the way I see connections and trust in this digital age. I never expected a late-night Hinge date to land me in the middle of a mystery that still makes my skin crawl. It all started when I matched with Ryan, a guy whose profile radiated an odd mix of charm and enigma. His pictures showed him at night events and in dimly lit bars, always with a quiet intensity in his eyes that somehow felt both inviting and cautionary. I was drawn in by his mysterious vibe, and when we finally agreed to meet up one chilly autumn evening, I had no idea that I was about to step into a scene that resembled one of those unsolved crime stories I'd read about in the papers. The date was set at a small, nondescript diner that was open late, a spot known to cater to night owls and those who prefer to hide their faces under the neon glow of flickering signs. I arrived a little early and took a seat in a booth near the window, trying to shake off the unusual nervousness that had settled in my stomach. The diner was nearly empty, and the silence of the night made the ticking of the clock feel louder than usual. When Ryan walked in, I noticed he was wearing a worn leather jacket and carried himself with a kind of nonchalance that made him seem both relaxed and alert, as if he were aware of something I wasn't. We exchanged pleasantries and sat down to talk over greasy fries and lukewarm coffee. Ryan's conversation was easy at first, filled with amusing anecdotes about his life and odd jobs he'd taken on. But as the night progressed, his stories began to shift in tone. He started describing his fascination with the unsolved cases in our city, the disappearances that had never been explained, the mysterious figures caught on grainy surveillance footage, and the quiet whispers of corruption that hung over the city like a fog. I listened, intrigued by his deep knowledge of these incidents, though I couldn't help feeling a chill as he recounted details I had only heard in passing on the news. At first, I assumed he was just a fan of true crime, someone who had read too many articles and watched too many documentaries. But as he continued, I noticed an uncanny familiarity in the way he described events. He mentioned specifics about a particular case, a young woman who vanished on a rainy night, with descriptions of a car parked in a shadowed alley and a suspect who was never caught. The details he provided were far too precise, almost as if he had witnessed the event firsthand. My mind raced as I tried to reconcile the charming man before me with the dark undercurrents of his conversation. After the diner closed and we stepped out into the cool night air, Ryan suggested we take a walk to a nearby park. I agreed, thinking it would be a nice way to end the evening, but the walk turned into something else entirely. The park was nearly deserted, its pathways illuminated only by sporadic streetlights that cast long, eerie shadows. As we strolled, Ryan continued to speak, his voice dropping to a quieter, more confidential tone. He told me that the unsolved crimes weren't just stories for him. They were part of his past. He hinted that he had connections to people who were involved in those cases, and his tone was laced with a sadness that made my heart race with a mix of empathy and fear. I tried to steer the conversation back to lighter topics, but the darkness in his eyes seemed to pull me back every time. He spoke of long nights spent wandering the city's back alleys, of overhearing snippets of conversations that hinted at a larger conspiracy, and of encounters with individuals who vanished as mysteriously as the victims in those cold cases. With each word, I felt as though I were being drawn deeper into a secret world where nothing was as it appeared. The city, with its familiar streets and hidden corners, suddenly felt like a maze of danger and unresolved mysteries. The further we walked, the more I noticed subtle signs that something was off. There were moments when I caught glimpses of figures in the distance, a shadow disappearing behind a tree, a silhouette that vanished before I could get a clear look. At first, I dismissed these as tricks of the light or my imagination running wild. But as Ryan's stories grew more vivid and unsettling, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. I started to wonder if the darkness that surrounded us was more than just the absence of light. It felt as if the night itself was watching, waiting for something to happen. At one point, we stopped near a small abandoned building that Ryan said used to be a safe house for someone involved in one of the cases. He described the crumbling walls and broken windows with such detail that I could almost see the ghost of what it once was, a place that had borne witness to secrets and pain. It was then that I realized the gravity of what I was hearing. Ryan's words weren't just idle musings. They were confessions from someone who had lived on the fringes of a dangerous underworld. I felt a pit form in my stomach as I tried to understand how a seemingly ordinary Hinge match could be so intimately connected to such dark events. Despite the mounting tension, I couldn't bring myself to end the evening abruptly. There was a strange magnetic pull in Ryan's stories that made me want to know more, even as every instinct told me to run. I found myself caught between curiosity and fear, a spectator to a narrative that was unfolding in real time. Every step we took in that darkened park, every word that left his lips, added another layer to the mystery that now enveloped me. It was as if I were in the middle of one of those true crime shows, where the line between reality and nightmare blurs until you're no longer sure which side you're on. Eventually, we made our way back to my car, the silence between us heavy with unspoken questions and unsolved mysteries. I drove home with a mind buzzing with the night's revelations, feeling both exhilarated and deeply unsettled. In the days that followed, I found myself obsessively researching the cases Ryan had mentioned. I read through old news reports, looked up police records, and even joined online forums where people discussed the unsolved crimes in our city. The more I learned, the more I realized how deeply Ryan's narrative intertwined with these long-forgotten cases. The experience left me with a lingering sense of dread and fascination that I can't quite shake off. I continued to wonder if I merely brushed against the edge of something far more sinister than a late-night date. Ryan's life, with all its hidden layers and dangerous connections, remains an enigma to me, a puzzle that I'm not sure I ever want to solve completely. I still think about that night every time I pass by the park or see a car with its lights off in a deserted alley. It's a reminder that sometimes, behind the mask of a perfect match, there can be a world of secrets and shadows waiting to pull you in. I'm not entirely sure what happened to Ryan after that night. We lost contact soon enough, and his profile on Hinge vanished as if he were just a figment of my imagination. But the memory of that eerie date is seared into my mind, a constant reminder that in the digital world of dating, you never really know who you're inviting into your life. Every profile is just a snapshot, a glimpse into a life that could harbor darkness behind its best pictures. That night changed the way I view online dating forever. It taught me that some stories are not meant to be unraveled, and that sometimes the thrill of a connection comes with the risk of stumbling upon secrets that are best left undisturbed. I never thought that a casual swipe on Hinge would turn my life upside down in the most disturbing way. It started when I matched with someone who went by the name Jessica. Her profile was filled with bright, smiling photos, quirky captions, and a vibe that made her seem approachable and fun. I was drawn in immediately, and we quickly set up a date at a small local bar that night. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and for a while, everything felt perfectly normal. But soon enough, I began to notice little things that didn't quite add up. At first, it was the subtle details, the way she would slip a glance at her phone as if checking for messages, or how she avoided talking about her past. I brushed it off as typical dating nerves, thinking that maybe she was just shy about sharing too much too soon. However, as we continued seeing each other, I started feeling like I was talking to two different people. There were moments when Jessica was warm and engaging, and other times when she seemed distant, almost like she was pretending to be someone else entirely. My suspicions began to grow when I decided to do a little casual search online. It started off innocently. I just Googled her name along with the city we lived in to see if I could find any more information about her. What I found was baffling. The pictures on her profile were used on multiple other profiles under different names on various social media platforms. There were inconsistencies in the details of her life. One website mentioned a Jessica who was an aspiring artist with a soft-spoken nature, while another profile under a different name claimed she was a high-powered lawyer. The same photos, the same quirky smile, but entirely different backstories. The more I dug, the more I realized that something wasn't right. One evening, after one of our dates, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I was being deceived. I decided to look deeper into her online footprint, spending hours cross-referencing details and trying to piece together the truth. I discovered that many of the posts and photos were recent, but they were being used by different profiles in different cities. It was as if someone had created a network of fake identities, and Jessica was just one of many masks they wore. My heart pounded as I realized that I might have unwittingly become part of something far more sinister than a case of minor embellishments on a dating profile. I confronted my doubts internally, unsure if I was overthinking the situation. But the more I investigated, the more evidence I uncovered that pointed towards identity theft. There were forum posts and comments from other users who had encountered similar inconsistencies. Some people mentioned that they had been ghosted after realizing that the person they were talking to was not who they claimed to be. I felt a sinking realization that I was not alone in this, that there were others out there who had fallen for the same elaborate ruse. The fact that I had trusted Jessica, or whoever she really was, made the betrayal feel even more personal. The turning point came on a chilly Saturday night. Jessica invited me over to her apartment for dinner, a gesture that I had grown to appreciate as we started spending more time together. The apartment was cozy, decorated with soft lighting and an array of eclectic art pieces that gave it a warm, lived-in feel. We cooked together, laughed, and talked about our dreams and fears. For a moment, everything felt real and comforting. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being observed. I noticed small details that seemed out of place: an unfamiliar book on her shelf, a few odd items tucked away in a drawer, and a locked door that she refused to discuss. At the time, I convinced myself that it was just normal privacy. I had no idea how close I was to the truth. A few days later, I received a message from an unknown number. It was short and cryptic, hinting that I should be careful about who I trusted. My heart raced as I wondered if it was related to Jessica or if it was just a random prank. The more I thought about it, the more I began to connect the dots. I realized that I might have become entangled in something much larger than a simple case of online dating deception. I started to feel paranoid, checking my phone constantly and even looking over my shoulder when I walked home from work. The thrill of the initial connection had evaporated, replaced by a creeping sense of dread. Determined to get to the bottom of it all, I gathered every piece of evidence I could find and decided to confront Jessica directly. I texted her, asking for clarity about the discrepancies I had uncovered. Her responses were evasive, filled with vague reassurances that everything was fine. But there was something in her tone that made it clear she was hiding something. The more I pressed, the more she deflected, leaving me with more questions than answers. I began to suspect that I was dealing with someone who was not just fabricating a profile, but intentionally manipulating multiple identities for reasons I couldn't fathom. As days turned into weeks, the situation only became more unsettling. I found myself constantly checking her online profiles, comparing pictures and details, and the inconsistencies only grew. It wasn't just that Jessica had multiple identities. It was that she was actively using them to orchestrate a complex web of deceit. I realized that I had been caught in a scheme of identity theft, where someone was not only lying about who they were but also potentially using my trust and personal information as part of a larger plan. I started to worry about the implications. Had I unknowingly shared too much? Was I now vulnerable to other forms of fraud or manipulation? The more I thought about it, the more I began to understand the chilling truth. This wasn't just about a fake profile or a case of minor embellishment. It was a calculated effort to build trust, to use that trust as a stepping stone for something far more dangerous. I felt as if I had been drawn into a carefully constructed trap, where every smile and every kind word had been part of a larger ruse. The betrayal was more than just a personal slight. It was a violation of my sense of security and trust. I was left questioning every interaction I had ever had on dating apps, wondering how many others might be falling prey to the same elaborate deception. In the weeks that followed, I made the difficult decision to cut off all contact. I reported the suspicious profiles to the dating app, and I took steps to secure my personal information. But the damage was done. I couldn't shake the feeling of being constantly watched, that somewhere out there, someone was using the facade of a perfect match to hide their true, sinister intentions. Every time I logged on to Hinge or saw a familiar smile in a profile picture, I couldn't help but wonder if it was just another mask, hiding a deeper, darker reality. Now, whenever I think back on those days, I'm filled with a mix of anger and disbelief. Anger that I had been so easily deceived, and disbelief that someone could go to such lengths to manipulate others. The whole experience left me with scars that are not visible, but are deeply etched into my sense of trust and caution. I never expected that the quest for a genuine connection would lead me down a path of paranoia and betrayal, but that's exactly what happened. There's no neat resolution to this story, just the lingering feeling that in the world of online dating, nothing is ever truly as it seems. I share this account not to warn or preach, but to remind myself that sometimes the pursuit of love can lead you into the most unexpected and unsettling corners of human deception. Even now, as I try to move on and heal from the experience, a part of me remains wary of every smile, every kind word, and every profile that seems too perfect. The betrayal I experienced wasn't just about lies. It was about a carefully crafted illusion that shattered the trust I once held dear, leaving me to pick up the pieces and move forward with a heart that will never be the same. I never imagined that a simple swipe on Hinge would plunge me into a world of secrets, danger, and a relentless game of cat and mouse. It all began on a rainy evening when I matched with someone named Tyler. His profile was unassuming, filled with candid shots of him hiking, laughing with friends, and enjoying the occasional coffee at quirky local cafes. There was nothing overtly flashy about him, but his relaxed smile and genuine interest made him seem approachable. I remember feeling an unexpected spark of curiosity as I swiped right, never suspecting that this casual encounter would soon evolve into a situation that left me constantly looking over my shoulder. At first, our conversations were just like any other online dating exchange. Tyler was easy to talk to, and his messages carried a warmth that made me feel as if I had known him for years. We talked about our favorite movies, shared stories from our childhoods, and even exchanged recommendations for local restaurants. There was a sense of comfort in our interactions that made me forget, at least temporarily, the usual wariness that accompanies meeting someone new online. We quickly arranged a date at a small, offbeat bar downtown that I had never been to before. The night was pleasantly uneventful, and I left feeling a mixture of excitement and relief that I had finally met someone who seemed so genuine. However, as the days turned into weeks, I began noticing things that felt off. It started with small, seemingly insignificant details. A message from Tyler that was sent at an odd hour with a slight delay, as if someone else had been typing it, or the way he would sometimes give overly detailed descriptions of his daily routines that somehow echoed details from my own life. I initially chalked it up to coincidence, maybe even a quirky habit of his, but the coincidences grew too many to ignore. I started to feel a creeping sensation that I was not the only one watching. I vividly recall one particular afternoon when I was out running errands near my apartment. I spotted a man who looked strikingly similar to Tyler across the street. He was casually leaning against a parked car, watching the passers-by with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. I brushed it off as a trick of the light or simply a case of mistaken identity, but the incident left me with an uneasy feeling that lingered for days. I tried to tell myself it was nothing more than an overactive imagination fueled by the excitement of a new relationship, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being observed. The unease grew when I started receiving odd text messages from an unknown number. They were short, cryptic, and always arrived right after a date with Tyler or during a conversation, when I mentioned something personal about my life. The messages never spelled out anything explicitly threatening, but they hinted at knowing details that only someone very close to me could. I remember one message in particular that said only, "We're closer than you think," and it left me questioning everything. Was it a prank, or was it something more sinister? Determined to get to the bottom of it, I began to discreetly look into Tyler's online history. I searched through his social media profiles, checked his friends list, and even reached out to mutual acquaintances I found on various platforms. What I discovered was a series of inconsistencies that sent my heart racing. Photos that he claimed were taken during hikes were also posted on a public forum by a different name, and certain personal details seemed to have been altered or fabricated entirely. It was as if Tyler had been living several lives at once, carefully curating each version to suit different audiences. The realization that I might have been interacting with a person who wasn't entirely who he claimed to be made me feel both betrayed and terrified. My mind raced as I tried to piece together the puzzle. Every time I questioned a detail, another odd coincidence emerged. Tyler would cancel plans at the last minute with vague excuses, only to reappear unexpectedly at places I frequented. There were moments when I caught a glimpse of someone who resembled him in unexpected settings: a quiet corner of a bookstore, a nearly empty parking lot near my workplace, and even in the reflection of a shop window. It was as if he had become a ghostly presence in my everyday life, lurking just at the edge of my peripheral vision. The lines between coincidence and surveillance blurred until I was no longer sure which was which. One particularly chilling incident occurred on a stormy night when I was driving home from work. The roads were slick with rain, and the city lights blurred into streaks of color as I navigated the dark streets. Out of nowhere, I noticed a car that seemed to be following me. The vehicle maintained a consistent distance, its headlights dimmed so as not to draw attention, yet close enough for me to be aware of its presence. My heart pounded as I accelerated, only to find that the car kept pace with me. I managed to lose it momentarily by taking a series of unexpected turns, but the terror of that pursuit left me shaken to my core for days afterward. I eventually confronted my growing suspicions with a mix of fear and determination. I arranged to meet Tyler for another date, hoping that being in the same space would somehow offer clarity. The date was set at a quiet diner, a place that usually provided comfort with its familiar ambience. But from the moment I sat down, the feeling of being trapped in a trap was palpable. Tyler seemed distracted, his eyes constantly scanning the room as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. Every time I mentioned something that could hint at normality, like my recent run or a mundane errand, he would tense up, his smile faltering for a split second. The evening ended with no clear answers, only more questions and a lingering sense of dread. I left the diner with a heavy heart, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on me. I began to realize that what I thought was a simple case of online dating had become entangled with forces beyond my control. The person I had trusted, the one I believed was genuine, now seemed like a phantom operating in the shadows of my life. In the weeks that followed, I took drastic measures to protect myself. I changed my phone number, tightened the security on all my online profiles, and even considered filing a report with local authorities. But every step I took to shield myself only seemed to confirm my worst fears. The unknown texts continued, and the occasional sighting of a car with dimmed headlights became a haunting regularity. I felt like I was living in a perpetual state of alert, where every mundane moment held the possibility of an encounter with the person I had once trusted. There were nights when I lay awake, the silence of my room punctuated by the constant hum of anxiety. I replayed every conversation, every moment I had shared with Tyler, searching for clues that might explain his behavior. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings. Every passerby, every car, every shadow seemed to be a potential threat. The fear wasn't just about being followed. It was the realization that I had let someone into my life who might have been orchestrating all of this for reasons I could not fathom. I eventually decided to cut all ties with Tyler, hoping that by severing the connection, I could reclaim a sense of normalcy. I reported his profile to the dating app and took a long hiatus from online dating altogether. Yet, even after distancing myself, the memories of that period remained vivid and unyielding. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still see the glint in his eyes as he watched me from the corners of crowded rooms. Every time I stepped out, I felt the heavy weight of his unseen presence. Now I find myself more cautious than ever, with an ever-present reminder that not all matches on a dating app are as they appear. The experience left me with scars that run deeper than a broken heart. They altered the very way I perceived trust and safety. I share this account not as a cautionary tale with a neat resolution, but as a raw recounting of a time when the ordinary became extraordinary in the most disturbing ways. I never got a clear explanation for Tyler's motives, and perhaps that ambiguity is the most unsettling part of it all. There are days when I wonder if he's still out there, lurking in the background, a ghost of my past that refuses to fade away. Even now, every unfamiliar car or sudden shadow in the night sends a ripple of fear through me, a constant reminder that the digital world of dating can sometimes lead to encounters that are more dangerous than one ever expects. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video, check out the video on screen.